to go, and greetings, programs, and welcome to the latest edition of the Awesome Friday Movie Podcast, as I say it breathily in an effort to make Simon laugh.
It's working. It's working.
Keep
doing it. Keep
yes, so my name is Matthew, and this week we are speaking of two films, classics, a classic and a sequel to a classic, The Shining, by one Mr. Stanley Kubrick, and its a more recent sequel, Dr. Sleep, as directed by Mike Flanagan. How are you, Simon? Do tell us how you are.
Thank you for having me today. I'm good, thank you. I'm very excited to speak to Mr. Kubrick today about his opus.
I feel like most of our voices are like parodies of 50s English voices.
I'm a big fan of the transatlantic, half American, half British accents that newsreaders had in the 50s.
Yep.
Where they talk with lots of teeth. And it suits you very, very well when you do that accent. It falls very, very naturally into your natural pattern. So that's good. We should do the whole podcast in that voice. Absolutely.
I agree.
I'm fine. We were meant to. In context for this week's podcast, we were meant to go last night to the Rio and watch a double bill of Dr. Sleep and The Shining with a Q&A with Mike Flanagan. And we're both... Well, you're a massive Mike Flanagan fan. And I am. I've only recently come to his work through the spectacular Midnight Mass. And because of the world going to shit again, we didn't go. So, which I think was the right move. But it was incredibly disappointing to miss that event, even though I'm glad I didn't sit in a room with a bunch of strangers for 5 or 6 hours.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I was pretty desperate to go. I actually organized. There's a bunch of other people I know who are going to go, and basically none of us did for various reasons. But me specifically for health-based reasons. I just can't at the moment take the chance of being exposed due to the vulnerable people in my life, and the Omicron variant is going nuts. So I think the last film I saw in theaters was, I guess it was West Side Story last week, and it's probably going to be the last one for a while. So that means I have no idea when I'm going to see The Matrix or Spider-Man or The Kingsman. We were supposed to go to this on last night, which we're recording this on Saturday, so Friday, and on Thursday I was supposed to see The Kingsman. But the Disney early screenings in Vancouver tend to be with not just press, but also influencers and contest winners, and I just couldn't be in a room with that many people. The nature of the podcast might change a little bit in the next couple of months, assuming things don't get better pretty quickly, because I'm just not going to be able to go to movies anymore. So for reasons, so
it's going to be the Netflix podcast.
My thought was we would talk more about some classics and your microphone's in, I can't see your face. And
I'm sorry.
it's very important on the radio for me to see your face.
It's fine. I understand with a face like mine why that would be important to you. So
yeah, well, I mean, we're on the radio because I have a face for it, so it's fine. But yeah, so we were supposed to go see The Shining and Dr. Sleep with Q&As, I believe, in between and after from Mike Flanagan.
Yeah.
And it would have been amazing. But in the end, of the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people who I knew for a fact were planning to go, none of them did. So I kind of wonder what it was like last night.
I get the feeling a lot of people did that, because when I contacted the Rio, I haven't actually told you this, but they don't do refunds, but they very quickly said, thanks for getting in touch. Just let us know the next screening you want to go to. Just include this email and we'll credit you for that show. So
nice.
I think they've been very realistic about people's ability to do these kind of things at the moment. And attendance is going to be restricted to 50% again. You've got to feel sorry that for the Rio. The Rio faced bankruptcy, very close to bankruptcy earlier this year. Or was it last year when they got rescued?
Yeah, it was during the pandemic. That's all I can remember for sure
Yeah.
because time is a flat circle, and I don't remember.
So I do feel sorry for them. I really, really do, and many other businesses that need people there. But what can you do at the moment? But
I mean, I don't know.
on the plus side, I didn't make a total ass out of myself speaking to Mike Flanagan, which is 100% guaranteed. And if Katie Seagull was there as well, that just would have been a shit show of stuttering embarrassment as I try to formulate a sentence that's Midnight Mass was great, and also I liked Hush. Like, I mean, secretly, I want to be included in his cabal of actors. Because have you seen the cast for his next couple of things?
Indeed,
It's
I have.
pretty. It's
We'll come back to that because
it's insane.
Kylie Curran, who is in Doctor Sleep, has been cast in his next Netflix thing, which is very exciting.
Right.
Because she was one of
Okay.
my. I think I even put it in my 2019 yearly wrap up post that she was one of my favorite performers that year. So
Who is she in Doctor Sleep?
she plays Abra, the young girl with the
Oh,
shining that Dan
right,
connects with.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, so the plan tonight is I rewatched both films in reverse order, which was interesting. And Simon is a huge fan of The Shining and has
Yeah.
watched Doctor Sleep as well. So we're going to talk about them anyway. We didn't get to go to the show, but we're going to talk about them anyway. So now that we've bantered,
Let's start with The Shining.
yeah. And do we need to do a plot synopsis for The Shining? I feel
Nah.
like the movies came out
And
1980,
I mean,
1979.
and as a plot synopsis even, there's not too much you could say. The setup is pretty straightforward. There's a hotel, and it's winter season, and Jack and his family get hired to go live in this hotel just to keep it ticking over until tourist season starts again.
Yeah.
And
Jack, the
that's
aspiring writer, spends most of his time writing and drinking.
yeah. Yeah, God, who'd do that?
Yeah.
So I've got a question for you before we talk about the movie The Shining, because I've never read the book The Shining, and I hear there are some key differences between the Kubrick interpretation and the original book. Have you read the original Shining book at all?
So I have read The Shining, but I am 40 years old and I read it before I was 20. So
All right.
I wouldn't say it's the freshest thing in my mind.
Right.
I do know there are several pretty key differences. It's actually pretty interesting in that when we get to Doctor Sleep, how that movie manages to thread the needle of being both a sequel to the film The Shining and an adaptation of the book Doctor Sleep and a sequel to the novel The Shining.
Yeah.
It manages to pull that off in a way that I didn't even think would be possible. And I haven't read the book Doctor Sleep. I've read a lot about the book Doctor Sleep, but I heard it was bad, so I never read it.
Yeah, really.
But yeah, I mean the book and the movie of The Shining end in very different places. So the having to be a sequel to both of those things would be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and you haven't read it at all.
No, so I've read a couple of Stephen King's, but I have never read The Shining, and um, it would be quite difficult for me, especially when you've got a movie maker like Kubrick who is absolutely singular in his vision of something. If I think if I were to read The Shining, I would have had to have read it before I watched the movie, because the movie now is my default version of The Shining. And if I read the story of The Shining, I'm going to constantly be comparing it to this movie version. I'm not sure that's fair on the book, really, especially if there's been some creative license taken by, well, of course there was lots of license taken by Kubrick.
So I'm going to use a different book as an example of this. Sorry, hang on. Just going to put all this into do not disturb mode. Sorry for the live reading of what I'm doing right now, radio. So I am going to use the movie Jurassic Park as an example because I don't know if you've read the book Jurassic Park.
I have.
I know you've seen the movie Jurassic Park because it's great, but the book and the movie are very different.
They really are.
They're very much the same, but they're also very different, even down to like little details, like the fact that in the movie, the two kids, it's an older sister and a younger brother, and in the books, it's reversed. Or I should say the movie's reversed from the book. And when the great scene where they go and they find the sick Triceratops, in the book, it's a stegosaur. And like, these are like the littlest of the changes. There's so many changes. And I used to be like what you're describing, in that I read the book and then I saw the movie, and I love both, but I always sort of thought the movie was a little bit lesser than, because it wasn't just the book. But now that I'm older, I don't. It's not a problem for me anymore. I guess is where I'm going with this. I recognize that adaptation is an art in and of itself, and that some of the greatest film projects that we have are adaptations of books, and those adaptations change things. And I think in transposing things from one medium to another, that's a natural thing that's going to happen. And I don't think that one has to be lesser than, or even to put it in your language, one is not my default over the other.
Yeah.
I can just recognize them as separate entities.
It's definitely an advantage if they're very different from each other. Like if you compare Die Hard to the original book, which became Die Hard, which I can't remember the title now. You probably do, because you've got that kind of memory.
I do not remember, but it is.
The Die Hard, the book by Robert someone is a really good read. It's really entertaining, but it's got a much older cop in it, and he's got different motivations, and it's quite different in the same way how Jurassic Park book and movie are different, and you can kind of see how they took the core of one thing and made another, and it's different than saying say a Harry Potter that tried to be closer to the book but had to make some key changes. I think if you've got a bigger sweeping difference, then you can kind of get out of the mindset of comparing the two at once. So maybe I should read the Shining book at some point.
The book Die Hard is based on is apparently called Nothing Lasts Forever.
That's right.
And it's also a sequel. Die Hard is technically a sequel. So my one piece of trivia about that is I remember that I think it was Frank Sinatra started a movie based on the book that book is a sequel to.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway.
So
how's that for a digression?
Bruce Willis and Frank Sinatra played the same character. That's true.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing about The Shining is it kind of asks a question that I think Dr. Sleep answers, which I thought was really interesting. I know we're it's kind of a bridge already, but what I've always loved about The Shining is who's haunted, like what is haunted. So Jack goes to this hotel, and it's portrayed as a very haunted hotel, haunted by the people that died there and the previous workers, and some bad things went down. But his son, who gets in this weird trance, and he famously writes messages on mirrors because he's very good at backwards writing. His son is obviously either affected by this haunting or a key part of the haunting. And what I think is really interesting about Dr. Sleep is that it kind of answers that question, that Danny was a key part to what Jack was going through, not just a passive part of it, but maybe an instigator of what Jack was going through. Like, I love this idea that the hotel was like this battery. They described it as a battery to his shining energy. And
or that he was a battery that like lit the place up, basically.
Yeah. These 100 ghosts came out because of his shining energy, and Jack got involved. And then Jack's terrible personality traits came sort of rolled into this. And I think it's really, really interesting looking back on The Shining with that knowledge. Because when you watch it without Dr. Sleep, you kind of always is wondering, is this Jack's haunting or the hotel's haunting? Is it Danny's haunting? Like, where is this? Where does this come from? Like, how would you stop this? Like, what's the root of it? And the I actually find that kind of clarification really satisfying, and it's never really comprehensively answered in the movie, but it's comprehensively answered in Doctor Sleep, and I find that really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, The Shining is very much, it focuses on Jack and on Danny. And although Danny is clearly affected by the hotel or is affecting the hotel, um, like it's Jack that's getting the brunt of the uh, haunting, right? And it's even outlined very early on that the previous tenant caretaker killed his entire family with an axe, which is, as we all know, the the climax of The Shining is Jack chasing his family around with an axe in the hedge maze. I like that there's sort of vague implications as to where the ghosts come from in The Shining, but it's never really truly, it's not even really answered in Doctor Sleep. But I also really love the idea that they, I mean, I don't know how to say that we're supposed to be talking about The Shining, but all I want to talk about is Doctor Sleep. I'd like to preface everything that I'm about to say, the rest of this podcast, with the fact that I adore Doctor Sleep as a movie, as both a standalone piece of art and also as a sequel to, more specifically, the film The Shining. But and even though it'd be pretty easy argument to say that it's a little bit over long. It's 2.5 hours long. But Flanagan is so good and cares so much about character and character arc and character resolution that even though it's also horrifying, there's some brutally horrifying moments in this movie that like none of that takes away from the fact that it's also a brilliant character piece. I kind of want a middle piece of the story is there's definitely room for a film to be set between The Shining and Doctor Sleep that gives us more of Danny and more of Dick Halloran. So I mean, I don't know what to say about The Shining though. The Shining is a classic, and there's two types of people in the world. There's those that really like it and those that don't like it. And I think that's fine. I don't know anyone who just sort of thinks The Shining is fine. People tend to love it or hate it.
I mean, but right? It's the same. Every Kubrick movie is like that. There's no middle ground. You either think it's like a pinnacle of artistic cinematic expression, or you think it's a big pile of shit. Now, I haven't seen Eyes Wide Shut, but the consensus is pile of shit on that one. But I mean, The Shining as a piece of filmmaking is so spectacularly precise in its elements. And that was the thing about Kubrick. Famously did multiple takes, like 50 or 60 takes of like shots, even before he gets to the reverse shots. My problem with The Shining now is that I've learned too much about Kubrick on this movie. Like, I've learned what Shelley Duvall went through, and I've learned what he puts his actors through. And
it's a pretty classic case of.
I've lost some. No, when I watched The Shining first, it was before I did any kind of film training. So I think after a few years of working on sets and working with directors and seeing an alternative, I think it's really easy to fall into the trap that this kind of auteur vision, this multiple take, strip take, like pushing your actors to the limit, is the only way to make high art. And I'm very grateful to have learned that that's not the only way you can achieve incredible results. And I think that Kubrick, as a director, is a deeply flawed director, not with his results, but how he gets those results. Demands so much from an actor, from his crew as well, but with a kind of pretension that I don't think is valuable. Like it's really hard for me to watch any of his movies now and not think like the take I'm watching is one of 80. The actors are suffering, like, and was their performance any better in one take than the other? Like he the deal with his takes was that he wanted every precise detail correct, including the way a jacket wafted in the wind when Tom Cruise gets out of a car. Like, so it wasn't always in the actor's control. But I guess what I'm saying is that I kind of disagree deeply with his philosophy of what it takes to direct a movie. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, it's a pretty clear and classic case of, and I think we've forgiven lots of directors for this kind of stuff. Like the idea that in order to achieve art, you have to be a total asshole.
Yeah.
You know, and the idea that the auteur has a vision, and that vision needs to be adhered to precisely and exactly, when filmmaking and any kind of acting really is a collaborative effort. And it's great that he wants the coat to flap a certain way in the wind, but that's not always going to happen. And flapping a different way is not a big deal, and it's not worth, in the case, especially in the case of The Shining, the number of times he, probably berated Shelley Duvall specifically, and he, from what I understand, he basically was emotionally abusive to her in order to get her into the state that he wanted the character to be in, as opposed to relying on her skill as an actor.
She, like, I'm googling this now, but she like destroyed her voice box or something.
Yeah, she's not even an actor anymore. Like, she lives in the kind of, like, yeah, she had a rough go in Hollywood.
She was made to do the scene with him breaking through the door so many times. So she basically had to scream so much that she physically like broke her voice box.
Wow.
And this reminds me, of course, it's not directly linked to The Shining, but this reminds me with the interesting takes on interpretations of method acting at the moment. And on one side of the scale, you have Jared Leto sending rats and used condoms to people because he thinks that's method acting. And it is absolutely, let me be absolutely clear, as someone who knows what they're talking about, that is not method acting at all. That is not what any of the methods stipulated. It's just being an asshole. And on the flip side, this week, I haven't seen Succession, but there's an actor in Succession who had a New Yorker.
His name is Jeremy Strong.
Right.
And he plays Kendall Roy, and he's basically the protagonist of the show, and it's a super interesting read. And he is.
Yeah.
Go say what you're going to say, because I have thoughts about this.
So that article, which was kind of snidey, is like, oh, look at this guy going too over the top. Like, all of the methods that's listed in that article are completely valid and trained method acting elements. And what's been really interesting is that after that article came out, directors, co-actors, everyone who's worked with him has said this is a normal thing he does, and it's what makes him amazing. It's what puts him into the character. And the whole idea of playing the kazoo during Frank Langella's speech, Frank Langella told him to do things that would annoy him. Like, that's what the context is left out of this. And so he is not being an asshole to anyone. He's being super inclusive and really, really focused. And I've never seen Succession, but he's meant to be fantastic in it. And
so it's interesting because so that profile came out, and then later on, like the next week or the next day, the season finale of Succession aired, and like it pretty much was that episode was basically like, you could basically just see him stand up after. There's a specific scene where you could basically see him stand up and be like, "I'll take Miami now, dicks." Like, is so good. And it's interesting because it goes back to that what we were just talking about with Kubrick, and that exacting way he wanted to work and the way he demanded so much of his actors. So there's a scene in the finale of Succession where the three main siblings, Kendall and Roman and Shiv, are sort of having it out. They're worried their dad is about to screw them over, and they're having this scene, and Kendall's having a very emotional time. He's in the middle of building towards finally telling them something that they don't know about that happened a couple years ago. couple of seasons ago. And the way the director triggered that for him was to not tell him what was going to happen, but to let the scene play out. And then he just sent an extra in to empty trash. Like someone dressed as a kitchen worker comes out of a door and puts trash in a trash bin and goes back inside. And that was the moment. And apparently Jeremy Strong just intuited that was the moment he was to fully break down. And he did. And it's an amazing scene. And it's such a level of trust. And the director didn't tell him. Like Mark Mylod, the director of that episode and producer of the show, had such trust in his performance and his ability to perform that he knew he could just like give him the slightest of nudges indirectly and it would result in a great performance. So, and that's just like the exact opposite of the kind of dick that the auteurs like Kubrick are. And like, as another example, I don't know if you like, I know some of you don't like The Last Jedi and you're wrong and that's fine. But if you own The Last Jedi, then you have access to a feature-length documentary making of called The Director and the Jedi. And Rian Johnson is a director who has a very singular vision, has very specific taste, has very specific things he wants to get out of actors' performances and character arcs. And if you watch that movie, you'll see he is incredibly gentle and very empathetic and approaches every scene, every actor even in a scene, just to give them feedback in the most like there's no other word for it, empathetic way. And it's like it also flies in the face of this idea that we need to forgive assholes for being assholes because they produce art.
Yeah.
So that's my rant. That I like The Shining, but Kubrick was an asshole.
And you don't have to be an asshole to be an auteur as well. Like I read an interesting article about Mary Elizabeth Winstead this week, her work on Death Proof, how Tarantino specifically wrote this character to be brought on the page. He wanted everything on the page. And as he was filming, her read of this character was so different from what he imagined. Instead of controlling what he wanted, he realized that she was giving him this character a whole new aspect, and he basically changed the whole idea of what this character would be and just let her run with it and let her form it. And he said that single moment actually changed how he makes all of his films from that point on. And I think you can still be an auteur and have that design and have that visual element and have that characteristic, but still trust actors and still work with spontaneity and improvisation. Because there's not a single moment of spontaneity in anything Kubrick's made. By design, whenever you see that spontaneous energy, that is the talent of the actor being focused for 8 or 9 hours doing the same scene and finding that energy over and over again. There's fantastic B-roll of Jack Nicholson getting ready to go through the door. I'm sure you've seen this as well, where he's psyching himself up with the axe to go through that door, like over and over and over and over. And how, like, psychologically and emotionally and physically, the actor, like Nicholson, is very, very good at that. His intensity is incredible. But Kubrick gets the credit for that. And there's whenever you see any kind of energy or spontaneity in any of his films, it's because of the actor. And that kind of direction loses random electricity. It loses the opportunity for naturalized things to happen. And the more I learn about filmmaking, the less respect I have for that kind of approach.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, right? Like the second that I figured out you didn't need to be an asshole to produce art, or that we didn't need to forgive assholes because they produce art, changed my entire worldview. Really.
Yeah.
For once I was a babe, and now I am a man. But anyway. So that's very much like The Shining.
I mean, it is exactly the context of The Shining as you get older changes. But I'll never forget watching The Shining the first time. Mm-hmm. And you talk about twist. I'm going to spoil The Shining for you. I'm sorry if you haven't seen it in the last, when did this come out? 40 years ago?
Yeah, 1980, so 41 years.
No, I'm sorry. 1980 was 20 years ago. You must be mistaken.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure when you talk about perfectly set up and then delivered twists that you never saw coming. Like to see him writing and writing and writing all through the movie, and you think he's slowly going insane, and then when Shelley Duvall looks at what he's been writing all this time, and it's that same line over and over and over, and you realize, oh fuck, this has not been a slow process. This has been a totality from the beginning.
Yep.
Incredible. And of course the ending, that final image of him frozen in the hedges, it's not the same as the book, but it's one of the great like freeze frame endings, and it's a true horror ending as well.
Yeah. Having just rewatched it, I can confirm all of that.
And it's a weird fucking movie as well. Just like blowjobs from people in bear suits and people in bathrooms and just things that creak in the dark. It really plays very strongly on deep human fears. It's a very uncomfortable movie to watch.
Yeah, it's also I think the setting, not only just the fact that it's this remote hotel that you can't get to or from in the winter that they're stuck at, but also just the very, it's not, I was going to say the very 70s of it, but it's not that. It's that like there's a scene in a bathroom, and the bathroom is basically all like bright red and white, and a lot of the locations have that sort of like really unsettling color schemes and unsettling like layouts, and it's a really interesting effect. And I do really like The Shining. I'm not gonna lie, I actually don't love The Shining. I think it's a great movie. I don't think it's like an all-timer for me, but I do very much appreciate it. And I think it's funny because I was just, before we started recording, I looked up my notes from the times that I've watched this since I started taking copious notes. And not last night, but the last time I watched it, my main takeaway was apparently that I wish that Jack had started out nice, but he's actually an asshole from the start.
Yeah.
Like it's not just that he goes crazy immediately, and that's a big reveal. It's that he's just an asshole the whole time.
Yeah.
So, and you can tell, I could really tell actually, having watched them in reverse order last night, every time in the first third or so, before he goes to the bar and gets his first drink, every time he talks about not drinking, he says it with such disdain. Like he really wants to be drinking. He wants, he's trying to be good for his family, but he's not good, and I think he knows that. So it's a super interesting movie. But I don't know about you, but I want to move on to Dr. Sleep because
let's do it.
I adore Dr. Sleep. So for those of you who haven't seen it, Dr. Sleep is a sequel to both the novel and the movie Shining. It follows Danny Torrance, now grown. It's about 30 years later. And he, the beginning of the movie, he leads a bit of a rough life, but he eventually gets himself turned around, and eventually he finds another young person who also shines, and he's been stifling his shining. He spends 20 to 30 years basically just drinking and boozing and doing everything he can to dull himself, to close things out of his mind, to stop the ghosts and other things from getting in. And all the while being, occasionally visited by the specter of Dick Hallorann, who is played by Scatman Crothers in The Shining and is played by Carl Lumley in Dr. Sleep, who appears to him as a ghost because, of course, Dick dies in The Shining. But eventually he gets his life turned around and he meets another young girl who shines, and she has attracted the attention of Rebecca Ferguson and Zahn McLaren and another group of what are effectively vampires. They call themselves the True Knot, and effectively they feed on shine. Yeah. They travel North America and they just feed on kids who shine, and it extends their life. And they all shine to some degree themselves, and consuming that shining heightens their abilities and lengthens their lives. I don't want to spoil the end of this movie because you should definitely watch it. It is great. I don't know. So I know that you didn't. What's your initial impression? Because I've seen this movie several times, and it was one of my favorite movies of 2019. So, what's your impression?
So, my impression of the amount of the Doctor Sleep that I've seen so far is kind of up and down. So, on the upside, I think Mike Flanagan is so good at visual framing and introducing things into frame and editing in and out of frame. I mean, in Midnight Mass, that was one of the high points for me, is just how it looked and how it moved. So visually it's great, and in some of these scenes he's recreating some elements of The Shining as well, and the work that must have gone into recreating that so precisely, it's kind of mind-blowing how perfect his recreation of the Overlook is. The I found what I've watched so far a deeply uncomfortable movie to watch. Like, not enjoyable at all on any level to watch. Like, it just feels really what's the right word? Dark. And I've watched a lot of horror movies, and there's something about this film. Maybe it's because Danny's really emotionally feeling it, and a lot of that is because Ewan McGregor in this is fantastic. Like, he's a great actor anyway. He is so good in this. He is so good in this. He is. He's done that great thing where you know what he sounds like loud, and in this he's very, very quiet. He's dialed everything down. He's doing a lot of work with just his eyes and his expressions. He looks thoroughly beaten. Like, the world has chewed him up and spit him out, and we know it's because of the ghosts he sees and the futures he sees and his shining skills. So he really sells it. And there is an issue here where there are some children in danger. A very early scene has Rebecca Ferguson's not vampires basically steal a child, and as a parent now, my context for that has completely changed. Like, I can watch many dark and horrifying things, but the children being like taken or hurt is a line for me these days. So I have real trouble watching that. And as that subplot extended past the women, the girl, they find in the cinema, the rattlesnake girl, which will make sense
Snake
when you
Bite
see
Andy.
this film. Snake Bite Andy.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that side of the story actually doesn't interest me at all. Like, the vampires, the energy vampires, the Colin Robinsons. I'm not interested in that at all. In that, Rebecca Ferguson is an amazing actress, and she's great in this as well. And she's so striking looking as well. But what I'm really interested in is the bit of movie I'm up to is Danny is using his abilities to help old people die. And I know that's not going to be the whole movie, but the last 20 minutes of this movie has been that. And honestly, the bit of the movie I've seen now is him being very, very distraught and destroyed, and it being a terrible place. And through the people he meets at this new town and the AA meetings, and discovering he has this gift that can help people, I kind of would love the rest of this movie to almost be like a Hallmark. Daniel Torrance didn't know where to run until people knew how to run into him. Shining.
I need to ask a question. So you're just at the point where he's sort of dealing with the second old man you see, right? The one that they end up singing.
Yes, and it's lovely.
Yeah. So it's interesting you say all that, because effectively that is, although, the first whole part of the film is Danny meandering through life, feeling like his shine is a curse, and eventually finding some purpose and use for it. And then have you seen the part where he sees Dick for the second time as an adult? So he's working at the hospice and he comes into a room and Dick is there. You haven't seen that part?
No.
And have you
heard him? He's
Okay.
heard him when he was taking the money from the wallet. He heard him, but he didn't see him. So I haven't got to
No,
that
he
part.
definitely saw him that part too. Actually, he's in the
So
room.
already,
Yeah.
okay. But I I I know where this film is going now because it's set up the elements. You know, he's starting to establish his gift can be used in a positive way, and he's going to connect with the little girl. And stop me if I'm wrong, but he's going to fight back against the energy vampires, and there's going to be a big shine off, some kind of big CG driven fight in the last third. And honestly, I kind of want it just to be him helping old people die, like learning how to kind of counterbalance the horrors he sees through his shining, learning a way for it to be this massively positive thing. But it's because those scenes are just lovely. It doesn't deal with death in a supernatural way, even though he has a supernatural gift. It's and again, Ewan McGregor takes credit for this, and Mike Flanagan gives it time to sort of be still, but it's just lovely scenes. Like that singing with the guy who's dying is just lovely, and we all think about this. This is something we all think about, like the unknown quantity of death, and to have this as an answer is kind of lovely, actually.
Yeah. So the rest of the film is very much, yeah, it's about Danny learning that his shine isn't a curse, basically. And as the ghost of Dick Halloran at one point says, that like once he's made contact with once he's met Abra, so through the movie, once he's sort of turned his life around, he's staying in this room that has one whole wall that's a chalkboard, and they communicate by psychically drawing on the chalkboard. But once so the True Knot, about a third of the way in, or maybe halfway, abduct a little boy played by Jacob Tremblay. He's a baseball player who shines. And the reason he shines, the way he shines, is that he always hits the ball. Every time he's at bat, he knows where the ball's going to be, and he hits it. And they abduct him, and they brutalize him. Like, this is a scene that I was telling you should actually. I don't think you should skip any of this movie, but if you have a sensitivity to children being harmed, and all credit to Rebecca Ferguson and Jacob Tremblay, that scene is horrifying. They have him tied down on the ground, and he's crying, and she explains that fear and pain purify the steam, and so they brutalize him for several minutes, and it is really hard to watch. Yeah. And that's the way the shine manifests as this like steam that they then collect and consume. And that scene, Abra feels it, and she basically destroys the chalkboard psychically from 100 miles away. And it's from that point on that they really start trying to deal with the True Knot, because they know that the True Knot are going to come for them, basically. And so they go to fight. You're right. They go to fight back. It's not hugely CG, but there's some CG elements. There's a great scene of Rebecca Ferguson astrally projecting, where the start of it is her flying through the air towards Abra's house. But then in most of it's practical, really. Like a lot of it, or at least feels practical. And then the big psychic showdown happens in a mental recreation of the hedge maze. In order to, once they've, I feel like I'm giving away too much, but basically the big final showdown, they figure they can't beat Rebecca Ferguson by themselves, so they go back to the Overlook to even the odds. They go, because the Overlook, it's established that the Overlook is a hungry place. And Danny explains this by saying when he was a child, like Abra is now, he bumped into something that was like these True Knot people, but it wasn't people, it was a place. It's established that the hotel is a hungry place. And so they go back there because if it's dangerous for them, it's probably dangerous for Rebecca Ferguson as well. And there's a big showdown. And it's wonderfully executed. And I really, really I want you to see all of it.
Yeah, I will. I'm really glad I know about the scene that I am absolutely going to be skipping. I do have a question for you that I won't spoil, because I'm interested how it affects the story. So near the beginning of the film, we see that Danny, after Overlook, is haunted by this terrifying old witch-like crone that he sees. Like
Yeah,
she's the woman from
the bathtub in room 237 in The Shining.
Right. And he mentions when he has the chat with the guy on the bench,
Dick Halloran, yeah.
Thank you, Dick Halloran, that she's gonna come
keep coming. Yeah.
Keep coming. Anyway, he goes into the bathroom. They're watching TV, and he stands up and walks into the bathroom, sees her in the bathtub, and to be credit to that young actor, the trauma he must have gone through as she rises out of the bathtub and there's a scream, and then he comes back and says, "Yeah, I'm fine." So, what significance does that have later on? Like, did he manage to like kill her in any way, or is this a massive spoiler?
This is a massive spoiler. So I'm happy to talk with you about this, but if we're going to keep going about in this direction, it's time for us to say, if you haven't seen this movie, you should stop. You should pause and go watch it and come back. Mm-hmm. But before we start talking about this, let's talk about a few other things. I think so. The choices Mike Flanagan faced, I think, were multiple when making this movie. But I think the biggest one he probably faced, and I would have loved to have asked him more about this at the Q&A, but he made the choice to, whenever he needed to flash back to The Shining, they recreated the sets and recast all the roles, as opposed to digitally doing anything. And I think that was 100% the right choice. Like 100%. There's a scene towards the end where Danny, in the Overlook, goes to the bar and has a long conversation with the bartender, who is clearly his father, and he's played by Henry Thomas, not Jack Nicholson, and not a digital avatar of Jack Nicholson. It's just Henry Thomas made up to look like Jack Torrance, and it works splendidly. And anytime there's a flashback to the scene in the bathroom where Jack is hacking his way through the door, and his mother is played in this movie by Alex Esso, who you remember from Midnight Mass. She was the old woman who de-aged. And I think in all of these, it's funny because we've had conversations about this before. I think most recently and most in depth when Carrie Fisher died, in about like ownership of roles and such, and digitally puppeteering people and that kind of thing. And I think this movie is a great example of why we don't need to do that. Like, I don't think we needed to digitally puppeteer. Now I've forgotten his name as soon as I need to say it. Tarkin from Rogue One.
Oh, Christopher Lee.
No. Nope.
Oh no! I can see his face. I'm gonna kick myself. Oh my god!
Is it Basil Rathbone?
Peter Cushing.
Peter Cushing, right? Yeah, Peter Cushing. Yeah, I don't feel that we needed to do that. I've always felt that recasting that role with someone and making him look similar is the right choice, and this movie's a great example of why that's the right choice, because they're not acting against something fake.
The Cushing example is really interesting because they got a voice actor to do Peter Cushing, and they got the voice actor to act as that character before they digitally put Tarkin over the top of him. And when you see this B-roll of the voice actor doing Cushing, you're like, they should have just used him. Like he looks great. He looks like good enough to be. If you just say he's Tarkin, everyone would have gone, yeah, okay, that's fine. He's got the mannerisms, he's got the voice.
He's tall. He's tall. He's slender. He has the same sort of sunken cheekbones, and like that stuff's not difficult to achieve in makeup anyway. So this movie, Dr. Sleep, is an excellent example of why that doesn't need to happen. And then there's so many just visual references to The Shining. I don't know if you noticed, but there's a scene early in Dr. Sleep where Danny is interviewing to become the hospice worker. And the office he has that interview in is basically a replica of the office that Jack Torrance has his job interview to be the caretaker in.
Oh, right, yeah.
Right? And there's lots of stuff like that. And then when they finally do get back to the Overlook, I mean, the amount of work that must have gone into recreating those sets is incredible because it looks the same. It looks exactly the same. It's also a really interesting shot where they talk at one point. They talk about what the inside of someone's mind looks like, and it's established that Rebecca Ferguson's mind is a cathedral. And the one time we get a quick glimpse into Danny's head, it's the Overlook. It's super interesting. So I mean, yeah, you should see Doctor Sleep. It's a great movie. If you have access to the director's cut, which yes is longer than 2.5 hours, is also, I would argue, better. It has much more. It's longer and slower, but has much more context and much more satisfying overall arcs. But the theatrical version, though, is still spectacular. That's the version I watched last night. It's still spectacular. And Rebecca Ferguson is amazing, and Ewan McGregor is amazing, and Kylie Curran is amazing. And also, if you're a fan of Mike Flanagan, you will see tons of people who you've seen before. You know, Robert Longstreet is in this. Now that I'm saying this out loud, I'm losing names, but lots of people. Alex Esso is another one who's in this. Like, there's lots of his cohort. And for the first time, I noticed that Molly C. Quinn is in. She has like a very brief cameo at the end as one of the Overlook ghosts. And I'd never noticed her. I've seen this movie like 4 times. I'd never noticed her before. So it's just lots of people that I know that he's friends with or likes working with, and and Henry Thomas especially. Like the brief glimpses of the scenes that they reshot. They basically recreated scenes from The Shining, and he is so good, even in like the little glimpses that we see playing Jack Torrance. And I think there's a real balance there of trying to recreate, but also letting the actor do their own thing that makes it interesting. And anyway, this is my thesis. You should watch Dr. Sleep. At this point, Simon is going to start asking me spoilery questions, I think, right after he says the conclusion I just interrupted. Go ahead.
No, it was a tangent thought about his wife, Katie Siegel, is not in this movie. And this is his biggest, this is Mike Flanagan's biggest movie he has made.
Yeah.
And so I would be interested to be privy on that conversation of, I don't have a part for you, darling. In my massive movie, there's no part for you. But
she's not in everything he makes. So it's like she's a main role in The Haunting of Hill House and a main role in Midnight Mass, but she only has a very small supporting role in The Haunting of Bly Manor. I don't think she has a very big role in Gerald's Game. I'm not sure she's in either of the things he's working on right now either. So
main part in Hush, though. I know. Yeah. I get the feeling that the healthiest way in that kind of relationship is to be super realistic about about casting, and that it's never personal. So it obviously works. So yes, tell me about young Danny versus old crone in the bath. Like, what significance does that have?
So this is the point where press pause, go watch the movie, come back. We're getting into heavy spoiler territory. If you like what you're hearing, please come support us. Give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcasting platform of choice. Support us on Patreon. Visit us at the website, awesomefriday.ca. We love you. Thank you. We're talking about spoilers. You were warned. So, when you watch that scene again, so he's sitting on the bench and the ghost of Dick Halloran approaches him, and they talk about how Danny's like, you told me that it was just pictures in a book, but they're actually coming to eat me, basically. And Dick explains that like the Overlook is a hungry place, and it was only ever pictures in a book to him, but he also didn't ever shine like Danny did. And he was like a 1,000,000-watt battery. And in that scene, he also gives him a small tin box and tells him to know the box inside and out, and to recreate a box in his mind. And from that point on, when Danny encounters one of the ghosts from the Overlook, he creates a box in his mind and puts the ghost into it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great scene, and I think it's the next scene with Dick, which is set like decades later. Danny's got his life turned around. And Danny's like, hey, what happens when I put the ghosts in the box? And Dick's like, do you care? And then they just move on. There's just no explanation, which is a wonderful moment. It's actually a really interestingly mirrored moment when I feel like there's some really interesting parallels between Danny and Rose the Hat in that there's a great moment. So right after the True Knot have turned Snakebite Andy into one of them, they've gone through the initiation. She's now like the steam vampire. She asks, am I still human? And Rose the Hat asks, do you care? Like in exactly the same tone as Dick says to Danny. It's really, really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
See, ghost in the box, eh?
So by the end of the movie, when they have the big ghostly showdown, the big shining showdown in the Overlook Hotel, he's been keeping these ghosts in these boxes in his head for 30 odd years, right? And by this point, him and his friend, played by Cliff Curtis, and Abra have managed to kill basically all of the True Knot except for Rebecca Ferguson. And so she just inhales all the steam. She juices herself up like crazy. That's why they go to the Overlook. He knows they can't beat her. So he goes in, he wakes it up, and when she gets there, she attacks him. They have a showdown in his mind, and he tries to put her in a box. But then when she gets the upper hand, and she's beating him pretty soundly, and she notices through her own shine that he has these boxes in his head, and she's like, oh, you have something special in there. What is it? Give it up. Are they special? And he's like, they're not special. They're starving. And he lets them all out, and they eat her. And it's horrifying and wonderful.
Wow.
It's such a good scene. And then they turn on him too, but that's a whole other thing.
Why? He gets eaten at the end.
No. In the end, I don't want to spoil it too badly for you, but in the end, there's some parallels with The Shining in that he ends up chasing Abra around with an axe because the hotel possesses him.
Oh.
It's really good. Like, you should just watch it. It's really good. It's really good. I think my favorite scene in the whole movie, though, is when they get to the Overlook, and he's like, here's what's happening. You're staying in the car. I'm going inside. You tell me when she gets here. And Abra's like, why can't I come in? He's like, no, it's too dangerous, and I have to wake it up. And when he goes inside, he wanders around, and the hotel like comes back to life as he walks through it. And then he gets to the bar where his father sat in 1980 and has a conversation with Lloyd, the bartender, which again is Henry Thomas done up to look like Jack Nicholson. And they have a very similar and paralleled conversation where in The Shining, quite famously, the bartender offers him a whiskey and he takes it. He takes his medicine. And in Dr. Sleep, the bartender offers him, says, are you going to take your medicine? And Danny turns it down. And I don't want to spoil it any more than that, but it's a wonderfully acted scene. And again, like good. the sets, the Overlook sets in particular, are incredible. And the movie also does something that I really love when a late stage sequel does this, but you don't actually hear the theme music from The Shining until they go to the Overlook. And then you get a very clear blast of it, and it's really effective. So, yeah, you should finish watching this movie, dude. It's so good.
Yeah. No, I will. Everything you're saying sounds really, really interesting.
There's a great scene where I think I mentioned where Rebecca Ferguson astrally projects to find Abra and then tries to what she thinks happening is she goes into Abra's mind and starts looking through the filing boxes that are Abra's mind, but what it turns out is that Abra has set a trap for her and that whole sequence as well is incredible. Just because Rebecca Ferguson goes from being cool and confident and fully in control to existentially terrified in roughly one heartbeat. And her performance throughout is incredible. So pitch perfect and nuanced. I really, she's so good in this. I don't know why she didn't win awards. I mean, I do know why she
I
didn't
mean,
win
it's a
awards. It's a horror movie.
yeah,
The
it's a
horror
genre
movies,
movie. Yeah,
genre movies don't get taken seriously, but she's so
no,
good. And she's actually, I don't know why I say that, because in all the places that the film did win awards, so like film festivals and all that kind of stuff, she was the one who consistently won. Like everywhere was nominated, she won a ton of festival awards for her performance.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a really interesting performer.
Yeah.
I really like the way you're describing it. I really like when a sequel takes the themes and ideas and uses them in a whole kind of different perspective. I'd be very interested how close this is to the book. Actually, is this as far from the Book of Doctor Sleep as The Shining was from The Shining?
Well, it's interesting. And again, I haven't read Doctor Sleep. I've just read about Doctor Sleep. But one of the key differences between the movie and the book, The Shining, is at the end of the book, the hotel burns down. So, whereas at the end of the book, Danny and his mother escape and Jack is frozen. So, all of the stuff that happens in Doctor Sleep, the movie just can't happen in the book because the Overlook burned down.
Mm.
Sorry, hang on. Okay. Sorry. Interrupted there for a second. So yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer. Like, this is why I was saying that, like, it's really interesting how well the movie threads the needle between being a sequel to an adaptation of the book, and also a sequel to the book, and also a sequel to the movie, right? Like, it has to be all of those things. And I think it achieves that through theme and character rather than through plot.
And tonally, I think it's very interesting how Mike Flanagan really captured the essence of a Stephen King story through his many adaptations, and it really makes me want to see him do the King books that I love, like The Stand. I would love to see Mike Flanagan do The Stand. Can you imagine how good that would be?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about it, because they already did an adaptation of The Stand just recently with somebody else. I just want to see Mike Flanagan do whatever he wants to do. I know that his next Netflix series is a young adult horror series, and then he's doing something based on the works of Edgar Allan Poe, and I'm in for it.
Yeah, it's gonna be very, very special. Definitely, he is a really, really interesting director. Like, really, you get the feeling. Hi, which one of your cats is saying hi on the podcast?
That is Sheldon. That's Sheldon.
Hi, Sheldon. I really enjoy visually his work. Like, it's so precise, and the design is so good, and his editing, or whoever he gets to edit his.
He edits. He actually
he edits too.
He's the credited.
It's really good. It's just really high quality. Everything he shoots and then edits. There's no jank to it at all. There's no like lost elements at all. It's really, really precise. And I've seen so I went Midnight Mass, and then Hush, and then this. And every frame has something in it that is worthwhile and interesting, and is framed really nicely. So just from a basic like visual kind of point of view, and from an editing point of view, I'm really, really enjoying like discovering his work.
Good. Can't wait for you to watch more of it.
I think I tried watching some Bly Manor, and I fell off that a bit. I know Haunting of Hill House I started watching, actually, and I fell off that a bit. I really want to watch Oculus.
You should definitely watch Oculus, which is an interesting sort of stealth Stephen King adaptation, but that's a conversation for a different time.
Oh, is it? Okay.
But Haunting of Hill House is probably my favorite thing that he's done.
Oh, okay.
I think you started watching Bly Manor, right? I think it was Bly Manor, because that's the easier of the two for sure. It's the less horror-y of the two.
Oh, okay. Which one has the creepy ass children? They lock her in a cupboard.
Yeah, that's Bly Manor.
That's Bly Manor. Okay, yeah. So that's the one I've started.
Yeah. You should keep going. It's good, and it ends really well. Hill House is, not to imply that Bly Manor is by any means bad, but Hill House is better.
Right. Yeah, you watched Hill House recently, didn't you? Rewatched it.
Yeah, we rewatched it earlier this year. We watched it, I think, right after we watched Midnight Mass.
I also really enjoy, and it's purely for selfish reasons, but he seems to whip out these immaculately done single takes now and again, just like without any fanfare. Suddenly, you're watching a 4 or 5 minute single take, and
if you enjoy that, you should watch Hill House, because there's one episode that's an hour long that's in 4 takes, or maybe it's 5.
Is it actually in 4 takes? Is it jiggery pokery and
no,
tricks, or is it actually 4 takes?
It's actually 4 takes. They had to build the sets the way they built them purposefully to achieve it. It was a thing they had to plan ahead of the series being even starting filming, because of the way that episode was going to be shot.
I feel sorry for producers in that stage, because it must be like when an actor says, when a director says, okay, I'm going to film this episode in 4 single takes, the producer must be like just please don't just shoot it normally, please.
Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, a well deployed long take can make all the difference in terms of impact, though, right? So
yeah, it really can.
And it's, he's so good at doing that thing where the camera moves slightly and the context changes. That episode of Hill House, it's number 6 or number 7, I can't remember which, has so many moments of like that, because the camera is basically always moving. There's a lovely moment right near the start where the whole episode is set at a funeral, and the 4 of the main characters are there, and they're all adults, and then Timothy Hutton plays their father. And there's a great moment where he enters the funeral, and the camera pans past him, and then it pans around from his point of view. It pans to his children, and then it comes back around to him, and then it comes back around to the children, and they're all standing there still, but they're all played by the kids that play them in the past timeline. And it's just such a wonderfully impactful small moment that probably took so much planning and rehearsal, but it works so well. He's probably the second best at that after Spielberg at this point.
Yeah. Wow. That's a hell of a director to be ahead of you.
I mean, he's basically
Spielberg.
He's basically the inheritor of, as much as Stranger Things is playing on Stephen King and Steven Spielberg, I would say Mike Flanagan is the proper inheritor of both.
Wow, that's high praise.
Yeah, Sheldon agrees.
That's high praise, and it's very interesting actually that you mentioned Spielberg, because that was a thought that occurred to me as I was watching Doctor Strange, and how things are framed and linked together. It felt very Spielbergian. That's an adjective.
Yeah. Good.
Well, so what's coming up? What have you got coming up for the next week, though?
Christmas.
Oh, come on. It's not as if you work in retail over Christmas.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I'm still attending Whistler Film Festival. I'm going to be publishing my year-end stuff in the next week sometime. And that's all I got. I have no energy to think about anything else.
Do you want to spoil your movie of the year yet, or are you going to save that for next week?
No, I'll save it for next week. Next week is Christmas, though, so we may have to either record early or record late.
Next week is Christmas?
Yeah. Next Sunday's Boxing Day.
Oh my God. Do you know how much Christmas shopping I've done?
Probably slightly less than me.
Zero. Precisely zero. I said to my wife this morning, how much shopping have you got left? And she's like, no, I'm done. I've done you. I've got you everything, and I've done nothing. So it's going to be a busy week.
Yeah, you're not alone. So anyway, well,
I look forward to. Yes.
I was going to say, on that bombshell, we should definitely. Yeah, on that bombshell, we should probably end. I'm being beckoned, and yeah. So, thank you for listening.
Go find us on Patreon. Give us money. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. And watch Dr. Sleep, because it's great.
Yes, do.
Okay.
Thanks. We love you.
Love you. Bye.
Bye.